The bell echoed through the vaulted ceilings of the lecture hall, signaling the end of the lecture. The target was in sight, Professor Julian Croft. On the dais, the man was a study in controlled precision. His crisp white shirt was immaculate, the top button secured fastidiously against his throat. Thin, gold-rimmed glasses caught the light, casting a sterile glint. He exuded an aura of untouchable intellect that kept a 10-foot radius of empty seats around him, a silent testament to his reputation. No student dared approach. He was collecting his papers with the slow, deliberate movements of someone calibrating a sensitive instrument. This was the moment. Leo moved, a blur of calculated purpose, cutting off the professor's only path of egress from the stage. He plastered a look of adoring reverence onto his face, his eyes wide and shining. Professor Croft's forward motion ceased. He lowered his gaze, and the look in his eyes was like a polar wind, sharp and analytical, dissecting Leo where he stood. A tremor of doubt shot through him, but the thought of the $1 million contract burned brighter. He pitched his voice to Carrie, ensuring the lingering students would hear every word. He remarked on the professor's impressive physique, wondering aloud and with suggestive sweetness about the kind of strength it implied. He declared his profound admiration, his desire to be as close to him as the top button on his shirt. He held his breath, his gaze locked on Julian's face, waiting for the inevitable explosion. A hush had fallen over the cavernous room. The rustling of backpacks stopped. Dozens of eyes were fixed on him, a mixture of shock, pity, and morbid curiosity. Everyone knew of Professor Croft's legendary intolerance for frivolity. The last student who'd attempted a joke in his vicinity had been academically vaporized. Leo had just delivered a monologue that was grounds for a restraining order. He braced himself for the dismissal, the disgust, the cold fury that would be the first seed of the scandal he was paid to create. Yet, the professor's expression remained a placid lake of neutrality. There was no anger, no contempt, not even a flicker of annoyance. Only the deep-set eyes behind the lenses moved, a cold scanner that bypassed Leo's face and settled with unnerving accuracy on his hand. Leo's fingers were white-knuckled, gripping the edge of his notebook so hard the joints ached. After a fraction of a second that stretched into an eternity, Julian's lips parted. His voice was level, devoid of emotion, a calm proposition in the charged silence. He suggested that such a bold claim required empirical evidence. A kiss, he proposed, would serve as a sufficient data point for belief. The carefully constructed mask of adoration on Leo's face shattered. The script had been flipped. The intel, the expensive dossier he'd been given, had painted a portrait of a man who measured his words like precious metals. This man had just spoken more consecutively than the file had claimed he would in a week. A collective gasp rippled through the remaining students. Leo stood frozen, his next lines of fawning pursuit dying in his throat. Without waiting for a response, Julian turned, the white shirt pulling taut across the lean lines of his back. He moved with an unhurried grace. As he passed the petrified Leo, the proximity was startling. Leo could count the individual lashes framing his downcast eyes. A clean, sharp scent of cedarwood and old paper washed over him, an invisible net that ensnared his senses. It was a surprisingly intoxicating scent. For a wild moment, Leo considered abandoning the plan and simply throwing his arms around the professor, right here in front of everyone. The photographer stationed outside would capture the moment, and the rumor mill would have its fuel. But as the thought formed, a cool sensation brushed against his skin. Julian's fingertips, almost imperceptibly, grazed the back of his hand, the very hand that was still strangling his notebook. The touch was as light as a feather, yet it sent a powerful jolt of electricity through Leo's entire body. The shock was paralyzing, a high-voltage current that shot from his hand to the crown of his head. He couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. He had initiated physical contact. The dossier had been explicit. Severe aversion to physical contact, a mandatory 3-foot social distance. A past student had been threatened with expulsion for an accidental brush of fingers. This information was catastrophically wrong. Before his brain could process the discrepancy, he was enveloped in a firm embrace. He heard the professor's calm voice near his ear, noting that Leo had seemed to be holding his arms open for some time and that it felt impolite to disappoint him. By the time the words registered, Julian Croft was already gone, a silhouette disappearing into the light of the hallway, leaving behind a stunned classroom and the faint, lingering scent of cedar. Leo stood rigid, a marionette with its strings cut. The spot on his hand tingled, a phantom itch of cool fire. His body, where it had been held, felt branded. His mind was a blizzard of static. A guy nearby finally found his voice, staring at Leo with awe. He wondered aloud if he was hallucinating, questioning if the notoriously germaphobic Professor Croft had actually just hugged someone. The classroom buzzed with whispers, but the sound seemed to come from underwater. A sharp, professional sense of crisis finally pierced Leo's daze. Something was fundamentally wrong. Julian's reaction was not that of an aloof academic being harassed. It was controlled, precise, and laced with an unnerving amusement. His phone vibrated violently in his pocket. A secure message, flagged with a crimson alert, from his employer, Isabella Vance. The text was blunt, demanding immediate signs of a scandal. Julian Croft had to be the one to break the engagement. The name on the screen was like a bucket of ice water, snapping Leo back to reality. He stared at the name, then looked down the empty corridor where Julian had disappeared. His eyes narrowed. This was going to be harder than he thought. But $1 million was a powerful motivator. 3 days yielded nothing. Isabella's messages grew more impatient, questioning his competence. There was no room for failure in his vocabulary. If the direct approach was neutralized, he would pivot. The new objective: infiltrate Julian Croft's home. Proximity was the key to manufacturing irrefutable proof. The camera he had planted outside the classroom had mysteriously vanished before it could capture the hug, a $10,000 piece of tech gone to waste. This time had to be different. The stage was set in a dimly lit, cobblestone alley near Julian's upscale apartment building, a known surveillance blind spot. The actors were in place. 3 hired men, more brawny than brilliant, but convincing enough in the dark. The script was simple. Julian walks home, the men accost him, and Leo swoops in for a heroic rescue, sustaining a minor but photogenic injury in the process. The grateful professor would then, out of guilt, take him home to care for him. Perfect. As dusk settled, Leo watched from the shadows. The familiar figure appeared, his white shirt a beacon in the gloom. He walked with the same unhurried confidence, as if he were surveying his own kingdom rather than a potentially dangerous alley. Leo gave the signal. The 3 men emerged, blocking Julian's path with practiced menace. Their lines were crude, demanding money with lewd undertones about alternative forms of payment. Julian stopped. The gaslights reflected off his glasses, obscuring his expression. He stood in silence, his stillness radiating an authority that made the 3 larger men unconsciously shrink back. It was Leo's cue. He burst from the shadows, shouting for them to stop, positioning himself protectively in front of Julian. He adopted his most courageous stance, silently urging the lead actor to give him a gentle shove so he could execute his staged fall. As the man reached for him, a hand landed firmly on the small of Leo's back, steadying him. It was strong and cool through the thin fabric of his shirt. Julian. He had moved with silent speed to a position just behind and to the side of Leo, his touch both a support and an act of possession. His calm gaze swept over the hired men, his voice low but carrying a strange, mocking resonance. He inquired if they were short on funds. In the flat tone of someone discussing a mathematical proof, he advised them to recalculate their risk-reward ratio. He cited the state's sentencing guidelines for attempted robbery and assault, then offered a clinical assessment of Leo's physical condition as subpar and his durability as questionable. He estimated the potential medical and liability costs would start at $50,000, while their potential gain was likely less than $2,000. He concluded by stating their optimal strategy was an immediate withdrawal. The lead actor's aggressive sneer froze, then melted into baffled confusion. After a moment of stunned silence, he muttered an expletive about educated people and fled, his two companions close on his heels. The alley was suddenly silent, occupied only by Leo, Julian, and the hand that still rested with unnerving steadiness on his lower back. The warmth of that palm seeped through his shirt, igniting the skin beneath. His brain, still reeling from the impromptu lecture on criminal finance, slowly registered the profound intimacy of their position. He tried to pull away, his voice trembling slightly as he addressed the professor, but the hand held firm, perhaps even tightening its grip. Julian looked down at him, his gaze sweeping over Leo's body as if checking for damage. When he asked if he was hurt, Leo quickly denied it. The scripted injury hadn't happened. Julian's tone seemed to carry a hint of disappointment. Then, his eyes locked onto Leo's left shin. Leo followed his gaze and cursed internally. In his haste to play the hero, he tripped over a loose cobblestone, tearing his pants and scraping his leg. A small patch of skin was raw and weeping a tiny bead of blood. He tried to play it off as nothing, but Julian crouched down, his expensive trousers dusting the grimy alley floor without a hint of concern. He gestured towards the minor scrape without touching it, his voice returning to its clinical tone. He noted it was an open wound, and while the probability of a tetanus infection was low, between 3 and 5 in 10,000, the mortality rate for such an infection was between 30 and 50%. He stood up, calmly stating the need for immediate cleaning, disinfection, and a tetanus antitoxin injection. Leo stared, speechless. He was being lectured on the fatality rates of a scraped shin. He protested that it was unnecessary, that he could handle it at home, all the while screaming internally for Julian to make the offer, to invite him back to his place. Julian watched him for a few long, silent seconds, as if evaluating the credibility of his statement. Then he spoke again, mentioning the tetanus incubation period. His apartment, he stated, had a complete medical kit. He concluded that, to ensure Leo's safety during the critical first 24 hours, Leo could stay with him. Success. Leo fought to suppress a triumphant grin, arranging his features into a mask of reluctant gratitude. He limped theatrically behind Julian, his mind already racing with possibilities. A bathroom encounter, a late-night visit to the bedroom. He would cement his role as the scandalous secret lover. This mission had to work. The client, after all, was Isabella Vance, heiress to one of the city's most powerful families. And the target, Julian Croft, was the sole heir to the other. The rumors surrounding Julian were bizarre, that he was impotent, that he had strange proclivities. No respectable woman would touch the engagement, which was why Leo, with his pretty face and flexible morals, had been brought in. Gender was irrelevant when $1 million was on the line. He was confident he could get the evidence he needed. Once inside the apartment, Leo's first move was to request a shower. The plan was simple. Get clean, stage a fall, and let the ensuing chaos, captured by a hidden camera, do the rest. Julian handed him a set of new, still-tagged pajamas and pointed him to the guest bathroom. The clothes were a perfect fit, the soft blue a color Leo himself would have chosen. The coincidences were piling up. He was humming in the shower, lost in the warm spray, when the bathroom door slid open with a soft, electronic hiss. Julian stood in the doorway, dressed in a dark gray silk robe, a first aid kit in his hand. His gaze, behind the gold-rimmed glasses, was as placid and analytical as a scientist observing a specimen. Leo, completely naked, froze under the spray, hot water and even hotter embarrassment flooding him. He hadn't even had a chance to fake his fall. Julian asked if he needed help with his wound, his eyes calmly taking in Leo's panicked attempt to cover himself. Leo stammered a refusal, grabbing for a towel. Julian seemed to raise an eyebrow almost imperceptibly, placed the kit on a dry countertop and left. The door slid silently shut. Leo leaned against the cool tile, his heart hammering. There was a flicker of something deeply unsettling, something almost like playful cruelty, beneath the professor's calm exterior. The dossier he'd been given was worse than useless. It was a work of fiction. The next night, Leo launched his second offensive. At 2 a.m, he slipped out of the guest room, barefoot and silent, making his way toward the master bedroom. The door was unlocked. He crept inside, the room lit only by the faint glow of a sleep monitor. Julian was a still form under the sheets, his breathing deep and even. As Leo's fingers were about to touch the duvet, a calm, quiet voice cut through the darkness. "Leo." The shock sent him stumbling forward. He didn't hit the plush carpet. He fell directly into a warm, solid embrace. Julian was sitting up, having caught him with perfect precision. In the dim light, his robe was open wider than before, revealing the sharp line of his collarbone. His glasses were off, and his dark eyes, no longer filtered through lenses, were like deep, cold pools reflecting Leo's own flushed and horrified face. One of Julian's arms was still wrapped around his waist, holding him in an undeniably intimate posture. He asked if Leo was sleepwalking, or if this intrusion was a more conscious endeavor. Leo's mind went blank. He stammered an excuse about looking for the bathroom and getting lost. The arm around his waist tightened, a human vice. A faint, almost imperceptible curve touched Julian's lips. He calmly pointed out the precise distance and turns required to get from the guest room to the master bedroom, concluding that the probability of such an error was lower than that of 2 specific atoms in the universe achieving quantum entanglement. Then his voice dropped lower, a dangerous, magnetic hum. He asked if Leo was here to verify his earlier classroom hypothesis about the structural integrity of his bed's top button. The words were a detonation in Leo's brain. His face burned. All his plans, his professional composure, evaporated into a cloud of flustered panic. Julian watched him, a slow, knowing amusement dawning in his eyes. He leaned closer, his breath a warm whisper against Leo's ear, and asked if he required assistance in unfastening the button for a closer inspection. Leo fled, scrambling back to his room with the sound of what he thought was a soft, triumphant chuckle following him. He buried his face in his pillow, his body on fire. A new, frantic text from Isabella arrived. A 3-day deadline for substantive progress, with a reminder of the contract's penalty clause, 10 times the fee, $10 million. He had to go bigger. The definitive proof, Julian Croft, heir to the Croft fortune, preferred men. The opportunity arrived unexpectedly. A call from the Croft estate. It was the patriarch's annual birthday gala, and Julian was required to bring a date. Over a breakfast so artfully arranged it looked like a magazine photo, Julian's gaze met his. He stated that he had a gala that evening and required a male companion. Leo's fork clattered against his plate. Taking him, the student impersonator and would-be seducer, to a family event was an audacious, almost unbelievable gift. The Croft estate, under the watchful eyes of high society, was the perfect stage. The Croft mansion was a monument to old money, glittering with chandeliers and overflowing with the city's elite. Leo, clad in a tuxedo that fit as if it were custom-made, clung to Julian's side, playing the part of a shy, adored lover. Julian was the picture of cool detachment, but whenever Leo tugged at his sleeve, he would cover Leo's hand with his own, his cool fingers a constant, possessive presence. During a lull, Leo leaned in close, whispering about how nervous he was, his warm breath intentionally brushing Julian's ear. Without missing a beat, Julian leaned back, his lips almost touching Leo's earlobe. He murmured a question, asking if this was more nerve-wracking than sneaking into his bedroom to seduce him. Leo's face erupted in a blush so intense it felt radioactive. The man was an expert at psychological warfare. Flustered, Leo grabbed a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. The cool liquid did little to quell the heat rising within him. After a few sips, the room began to feel warmer, his heart began to race, and his vision started to blur at the edges. The wine was drugged. He looked at Julian in panic. Julian's demeanor changed in an instant. The academic calm vanished, replaced by a sharp, dangerous focus. He took the glass from Leo's trembling hand, sniffed the dregs, and his eyes turned to ice. His voice was a low, lethal whisper as he asked who gave him the drink. Leo pointed weakly towards a retreating server. Julian's gaze locked onto the man like a predator, but instead of giving chase, he pulled Leo into a sudden, hard embrace. His arm wrapped tightly around Leo's waist, supporting his weakening body. He pressed a cool palm to Leo's feverish forehead. "Don't be afraid," he murmured, his voice a steady anchor in Leo's swirling consciousness. He then raised his head, his voice ringing out with cold authority across the suddenly quiet hall. His eyes fixed on his approaching father and a stunned Isabella Vance. He announced that his companion was unwell and that they would be leaving. Without another word, he swept Leo up into his arms. A collective gasp went through the crowd. Julian Croft, in front of his family, his fiancée, and the city's most influential people, was carrying a young man out of his own father's party. The scandal was explosive, perfect. Isabella looked thrilled, assuming this was Leo's masterstroke. But Leo knew he would never be so reckless. As Julian carried him through the sea of shocked faces, Leo buried his face in his chest, the steady, powerful beat of the professor's heart a strange comfort against the chaos raging inside him. In the back of the limousine, the drug's effects intensified. Leo moaned, squirming in Julian's arms, his hands fumbling with his own restrictive bow tie. His fingers accidentally brushed against the skin of Julian's throat. A low, strained sound came from above him. Julian seized his hand, his grip crushing. "Don't move, Leo," he rasped, his voice raw and tight. "Look at me." Leo's drug-hazy eyes met Julian's. The glasses were gone. In the dim light, his eyes were not cold pools but dark, burning embers. A torrent of suppressed emotion raged within them. Julian's forehead pressed against his, their hot breaths mingling. He asked if Leo knew who he was, what he was doing. Leo could only whimper his name, instinctively pressing closer to the coolness of his body, begging him for help. Julian's breath hitched, the fire in his eyes threatening to consume them both. He lowered his head, his lips hovering just above Leo's. The squeal of tires on pavement announced their arrival at the apartment, breaking the spell. Without hesitation, Julian carried him straight into the master bathroom. Leo clung to his shirt, his mind afog. He heard Julian's strained voice say that he was only doing what Leo had asked. He had asked for help, and Julian was going to give it to him. The next morning, Leo emerged from the bedroom feeling like he'd been hit by a truck. Julian was standing in the hallway, already dressed in fresh clothes, the gold-rimmed glasses back in place. He was once again the composed, inscrutable professor. He handed Leo a glass of water, his expression neutral. He looked completely unaffected, while every muscle in Leo's body ached. Leo took the water, his fingers trembling, and managed to ask about what had happened. Julian's gaze rested on his face for a few seconds. Then he reached out and gently brushed a stray, damp lock of hair from Leo's forehead. The gesture was shockingly tender. As he turned to leave, he spoke without looking back, his voice cool and clinical. It was merely the effects of the drug. Leo shouldn't overthink it. The door clicked shut. Leo stood frozen, the words echoing in his ears. Just the drug. Was it? Was the barely perceptible tremor in Julian's fingertips when he'd touched his hair also just the drug? In the mirror, his own flushed, confused face stared back. The mission, the money, Isabella, it all felt distant and meaningless. His carefully constructed world had been shattered, and his heart was in utter chaos. He had played a game and lost spectacularly. He had fallen for his target. He made his decision. He would terminate the contract, consequences be damned. He met Isabella at a discreet cafe. She looked furious before he even spoke, which confused him. The engagement was all but dead. She should have been celebrating. He took a deep breath and told her he was quitting. He would pay back the money, even the $10 million penalty, in installments. He was prepared for her rage. Instead, she stared at him as if he'd grown a second head. Then she burst out laughing. She asked him if he and Julian were together yet. When he denied it, she threw her hands up in exasperation, demanding to know what the holdup was after they had already slept together. She seemed more upset about their lack of official status than his quitting the job. Her frustration was utterly baffling. Finally, wiping tears of mirth from her eyes, she leaned forward and delivered the killing blow. She explained that she had never been the client. The client was, and always had been, Julian Croft. He had designated Leo specifically. He had provided the doctored intel file. The entire operation, from start to finish, was a play Julian had written, produced, and financed. Also, he could hire Leo to pursue him. He'd seen Leo at a university event months ago and had become obsessed, but was too socially inept to approach him directly. This insane, convoluted scheme was a mathematician's solution to a romantic problem. The world tilted on its axis. Every strange detail, every counter-move, every moment of unexpected intimacy snapped into a horrifyingly clear picture. It was a trap, $1 million snare, and he had danced into it like a fool. A wave of humiliation and white-hot rage washed over him. He shot up from his chair, ignoring Isabella's fading laughter, and ran. He switched off his phone and retreated to an old safe house, a tiny, hidden room he used for emergencies. In the dark silence, the anger gave way to a deep, aching pain. Every moment of connection had been a paid performance. He was a character in a game, and he had lost his heart in the process. A violent crash shattered the silence. The reinforced door of the safe house was being battered from the outside. The lock splintered, and the door flew open. A tall figure stood silhouetted against the hallway light. It was Julian, but not the man he knew. His shirt was wrinkled, his glasses were askew, and his eyes were bloodshot, wild with a frantic energy. He had found him. He crossed the room in 2 strides and seized Leo by the shoulders, his grip like steel. He demanded to know why Leo had run, his voice a raw, desperate growl. Leo fought back, shouting, calling him a liar and a manipulator. Julian didn't deny it. He confessed that the engagement to Isabella was a sham, a prop for his stage. He pulled Leo closer, their foreheads touching, his bloodshot eyes boring into Leo's. He admitted that he had been helpless, that this was the only way he could think of to get close. He wasn't acting. He was truly, hopelessly, completely in love with him. From the very first moment he saw him, he had been. He laid it all bare, not as a cool professor, but as a desperate man. He loved him. He begged Leo not to leave him again. He offered him the chance to hate him, to hit him, to run again, but pleaded for a chance to pursue him for real. In the small, dark room, all of Leo's anger and humiliation dissolved under the weight of this raw, broken confession. The hunter had been the prey all along. This brilliant, powerful man had built an elaborate, insane cage, not to trap Leo, but to trap himself with him. Leo looked at the man before him, stripped of all his composure, his eyes burning only for him. A sob escaped his lips, a mixture of pain and a strange, overwhelming relief. He raised a fist and struck Julian's chest weakly. "You're a lunatic," he choked out, the words half laugh, half cry. Julian pulled him into a crushing embrace, holding him as if he were the most precious thing in the universe. His lips, cold and trembling, found Leo's forehead in a kiss that was a promise. "Yes," he whispered against his skin. "Crazy for you." Outside the broken door, the city lights twinkled on, oblivious to the end of $1 million chase and the real, messy, beautiful beginning of everything that came after.